one book in the Bible whose primary purpose is to inform us about this cultus or this set of rituals, and that is the Book of Leviticus. But to understand Leviticus, we need to understand its arrangement, because it actually helps us to focus on the materials in parallel lines. First 7 chapters of the book deal with rituals, but these are rituals about sacrifices. Very specific, 5 sacrifices and the individual rituals for each one of them. At the other end of the book, they are also rituals, but this time it's the festivals. But to understand the rituals of Israel, you need to understand both the sacrifices and the festivals. In the next set of parallels, we have some priestly material. First, we have priestly history in chapters 8 to 10, and then some priestly legislation, 21 to 22. The redundancy of the priesthood once Jesus had appeared means that apart from some academic interests, these priestly legislation have very little to do with our lives. That the priests had to live by a much higher code of conduct. The next set of parallels have to do with clean and unclean. Some of the clean and unclean has to do with food, some of it has to do with hygiene, some has to do with infectious diseases, some had to do with house cleaning. And this is a bit surprising, because God is concerned about everything from how we look after our homes, how we look after our bodies, how we look after the sick, and so on and so forth. This structure is called a chiastic or concentric structure. And the centerpiece is the one that matters. The centerpiece of Leviticus, with no parallel lines, is Yom Kippur, the so-called Day of Atonement. Now there is some epilogue material, promises and commitment, which have nothing to do with the rituals per se. But Yom Kippur becomes focal point. There are 2 focal points in the life of Israel: the rituals, specifically the sacrifices, and Yom Kippur. All the other materials are important, but these 2 help us to understand the religion of the sanctuary. The first focal point is what we call the tamid. It's a rather difficult word to translate because it can mean daily, it can mean regular, and various other meanings. But it seems to talk about things that happen every single day of the week. There are 3 things that happen every day of the week: the sacrifices at the altar, the menorah or the candlestick, the light, and the incense. The burnt offering had to be offered every morning and every evening. The lambs had to be oiled and refreshed every morning and every evening. The incense had to be offered every morning and every evening. These 3 activities were tamid. These happen every single day of the year, even on the so-called festival days, even on Shabbat. These 3 things never stopped. The life of Israel, the calendar of Israel, if you like, was marked by these 3 activities. These were the focal points of Israel's daily routine. They became the clock of Israel. Every morning, every evening, at dawn and at dusk, like clockwork, cannot fail. Now, exactly how they kept time? Well, this is the Middle East. It's slightly below the tropics, and so time is fairly even. And so to some extent, we must be cautious in applying these to our lives. But sacrifice, the need for light, and incense, which stands for only one thing in the Bible, and that is prayer, these are necessities of the cultus. And this was the main work of priests. By the time Solomon's temple was built, there were so many priests that David reorganized the priesthood into 24 groups, 24 orders they were called. And each group or 2 groups would work for 1 month, and then the next 2 groups would come over and they would recycle through the year. It ended up that if you were a priest, you only worked for 1 month. The high priest worked for 1 day, normal priests worked for 1 month, but for the Israelites, worship happened every single day. There was always some priest on duty, day and night, Shabbat or no Shabbat, regular day or festival day. There were always priests on duty to tell Israel that you are never disconnected from God. It's almost as if to say the presence of God never takes a holiday. Now, the Jewish calendar or the Israel's calendar was 360 days a year. So for 360 days, God was always with them. And so when the temple of Solomon was destroyed and they found themselves in exile, that was the first question in their mind: is God still with us? Now, Israel never had any congregational worship, even on Shabbat. They never actually had a time where they come together like we do in one place and worship. They simply gathered around the sanctuary. We have some evidence in the Bible and rabbinic writings that every morning and every evening, as the priests were getting ready to offer that first burnt offering of the day, or the last one for the day, that the congregation of Israel would gather or stand outside their tents or gather around the tabernacle as this was going on. The point of that morning and evening exercise is simply to remind them you start the day with God and you bring it to a close with God, telling yourself that God is with you.